Good morning. Sorry I'm a couple of minutes late. I was noodling around with the technology again, as usual. Excuse me. Welcome to Sunday morning, wherever you are. It rained pretty heavily here this morning. You all get that over there? Oh, it was intense. It was great. It was beautiful. Sounded wonderful. Let's just take a moment to settle in. Mindfulness is about letting things be. Like the fact that it's intensely raining outside again. Letting your body be in its present moment. Letting your mind drift around and noticing. And in these meditative times, just letting whatever else is in our lives, just let it be. Even though the radio station of the mind calls us to think about these things. They will all still be here 45 minutes from now. They may look a little less important. They will come and go. But what if we work on or focus on just letting things be as they are? It's paradoxical. There is injustice and there's chaos and there's suffering, and knowing when to engage and when to not engage, which is what we're going to talk about today. We're continuing our journey through the 10 Paramis, and we have reached the perfection of wisdom. So, one of the things I'm letting be is a little thing in the back of my throat. Nothing I can really do about that. So we're going to talk about the wisdom of discernment. Knowing when to advance, knowing when to step back, and knowing when to step off. So we'll get to that after the meditation. But for now, let's start by finding a meditation posture. In which you are comfortable and alert. But not rigid. Sitting upright, but relaxed. And lower your gaze down the bridge of your nose to relax the muscles around your eyes. And gently close your eyes. And let's just settle in. Let our bodies settle. Let our minds settle. Let gravity do its thing. As we just settle in to sitting where we're sitting. And let yourself be aware of the sensations of your body being held to the earth by gravity. Just settling. And let's take a few slow, deep breaths. Just to help us get connected to the breath and the body breathing. And on the out breath, just continue to settle. As you breathe out, relax the muscles in your face and around your eyes. Relaxing your shoulders. And letting your thinking mind just settle and relax. Just letting it soothe and smooth. To whatever degree you can. And letting your breath return to normal. And letting your awareness come to the sensations of your body, breathing in and out. Just noticing the body breathing from the body rather than from the control tower of the head. Being with the sensations of the chest and belly expanding on the in-breath. And contracting on the out-breath as your body settles a little more. Just let your awareness rest on your breathing. The sensations of the in-breath as your chest and belly expand. The sensations at the top of the in-breath as you transition to an exhale. The physical sensations at the bottom of an exhale as your diaphragm relaxes into the next inhale. And if you can, and if it feels okay, you can allow yourself to pause just for a second at the bottom of the exhale and let your body relax and settle for a second. And inhale again. Just once or twice. Just resting your awareness on the rhythm of the body breathing. If you wander off in thought, that's okay. The mind does that on its own. But when you notice, just bow mentally, thinking, and kindly, gently, but firmly, compassionately, come back to your breathing. Again and again. letting your thoughts just come and go. And returning your attention to the breath. Letting your thoughts just come and go. Just watching them go by. Without getting involved in whatever narrative or issue that part of your mind is focused on. Just noticing the phenomenon of thinking and coming back to the breath. And as we come towards the end of this sitting, just be aware of our body and our mind settled into the present moment. Just being present. And let your mind contemplate bringing this presence out into the rest of the day. No pressure, no anxiety, just possible. And to let this meditation enable us to look out into the world with kindness and compassion. To help us be a little more present and steady in the lives of the people around us. And may it be that the benefits of this meditation flow out into our households and our neighborhoods, flow from our hearts into our homes and neighborhoods and towns. And to everywhere we walk today. May the benefits of this practice be of benefits to all beings everywhere. May all beings be happy. May all beings be well. May all beings be safe. May all beings be at ease and at peace. And may this practice allow us to contribute to that. Thank you all for your practice. Is that ROELFS? I don't believe I've seen you here. Welcome. And anybody else who's new, welcome to here. And welcome to the folks on Facebook who I can't see. As I said before, we're continuing our walk through what in Buddhism is known as the 10 Paramis, or the 10 perfections. And I'll review the history of this a little once again. Several eons ago, I do not know how long an eon is, there was an ascetic named Dipankara, and he happened to meet the incarnation of the Buddha at that time. His name was Sumita. I'm not sure which one was Sumita and which one was Dipankara, but this is just the way I do it at this point. And because of an act of charity that Dipankara offered, Sumita was so impressed that he decided to reveal to him that he would be incarnated in a future incarnation as the Buddha. the Buddha that we talk about now, actually. So Samhita set about to study what he thought of as how to perfect the heart for enlightenment. And he came up with what is now known as the 10 perfections, which were written down by Shantideva in the Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life. And the 10 are generosity, ethics or morality, renunciation, wisdom, energy, patience, truthfulness, resolution, loving kindness, and equanimity. And we have talked about generosity, morality, and renunciation, and now we're on to the fourth one. Wisdom. And wisdom suggests reflection and discernment and thinking. Thinking is good. I know, I'm a mindfulness teacher. we're always talking about not thinking. There's a place for it, and not. Sometimes we need to reflect, think about things, discuss them, consider them. And because mindfulness focuses on the non-discursive activity of the mind, some people, when I've talked to about this, tend to think that focusing on the discursive thinking part of the mind is somehow like unspiritual or something like that. But mindfulness is not opposed to reflection, and each has its importance. And it's really about discernment, when to, when not to. When I was in grad school, they made us take Aikido, which a lot of people asked, what does this have to do with learning to be a therapist? A lot, actually. Because the essence of Aikido, the way I was taught, is that there's a line between you and another person. And we're learning to know when and how to step forward to advance on the line, to step back on the line, or step off the line. And I think that's the nature of discernment. When to engage, when to not engage. When to allow ourselves to move forward, when to pause and think, when to act quickly, when to trust our instincts, when to consider more. And how do we do this? Well, the Buddha talked to this point in the Kalama Sutra, which is famously where the Kalamas came to him after he'd been teaching and said, essentially, why should we believe you? Because a lot of teachers had been going around at the time and teaching in the villages and clans and towns. And he said, well, don't take my word for it. I'm paraphrasing here. Don't take my word for it, and don't believe it because it's written in Scripture, and don't believe it because the wise people say, or the Brahmins say, or there's a long tradition behind it. And then he said, when you yourselves know these things are bad, blamable, censured by the wise, undertaken and observed, these things lead to harm and ill, abandon them. And he said, when you yourselves know these things are good, blameless, praised by the wise, undertaken and observed, these things lead to benefit and happiness, enter and abide in them. So he talked about this as essentially a model for discernment, to look for the highest good, We're trying to decide whether to advance, move back, or step off. Which promotes the highest good? I often wonder whether I'm doing things right. One of the things I've discovered recently in meditation is this tendency of my mind to go to, I'm wondering whether or not I'm doing this right. And I've been looking at that. And in preparing for this talk, I decided this is a really valuable piece for me. What promotes the highest good in terms of my practice and in terms of teaching the practice? Knowing that this issue I have as to whether I'm doing it right is an issue, but not necessarily reality. And the discernment is the discernment piece, the wisdom piece. There's nothing I really have to do about that, except trust myself and trust my instincts. That's the discernment piece. Knowing when to advance, knowing when to pull back, knowing when to step off. It's especially important when we're dealing with difficult situations and difficult feelings. Knowing when to address, knowing when to not, knowing when to ignore, knowing when to engage. For example, on the subject of thinking, if you're bothered by your thinking, focusing on your thinking will make you more bothered. You start thinking about whether or not I should be thinking. I'm not a good meditator. Right? That whole thing that we do. And then you spin out into more thinking, which leads to more thinking. And then you pause and say, and then you think about, I'm thinking, and now I'm thinking about thinking, and now I'm thinking I shouldn't be thinking, and on and on and on and on and on. The discernment piece is to know that that's just a process. And we can look at our thinking and just let it be, which is different than make it stop. Let it be. Return to our breath. And let thinking settle by itself. Just breathe. Breathe into the wisdom of reminding yourself that you're okay. The wisdom of self-compassion. And people who come to a lot of these talks know that I talk about self-compassion a lot, which I think is the heart of wisdom. In the 12-step world, they talk about this all the time. They recite this prayer that says, help me accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. When to act, when to sit still, when to walk away. We can't change other people, but we can decide how we're going to be okay. The wisdom to know when to engage and how to engage. Like when a child is acting out. A child is throwing a tantrum, it's easy to throw the tantrum with the child. People do that. Takes a little more mindfulness practice and a little more wisdom to offer the child our steadiness and not engage that energy, or maybe step off. I had a good friend in California, the best therapist I know for children, who talked about actively ignoring your child. The child is throwing a fit, and just don't respond. Don't take your eye off the child, but don't respond. Active ignoring. And she told me this story. There's a little parenting tip for you. She told me this story about a mother who walked kind of around the corner in the house, into the kitchen, while the child was throwing a tantrum. But it's where she could still be aware of the child. The child stopped the tantrum, moved to another position where she knew that the mother could see it, and resumed the tantrum. So, times to engage, times to not engage. If, on the other hand, your child is throwing a tantrum and picks up a sharp object, that's a good time to engage. Step forward, step back, step off the line. I was in a coffee shop in Santa Cruz, California. You know you're in a coffee shop in Santa Cruz, California, because there's like 50 or so different pour-over stations, and there's more different kinds of coffee than you will ever remember or consider in the entire rest of your life. And I'm there at the counter contemplating this. And there's this somewhat in the community well-known homeless guy there at the counter, and he's agitated. And he's giving the people on the other side of the counter a hard time. And they're starting to get agitated with him. They're stepping forward on his line. And I'm watching this scene, and everyone's starting to... And I just took a breath and looked at this guy who was obviously suffering. And I said, "Hey man, are you having a rough day?" And it like startled him. And it startled them. And the energy in the room came down. The energy came down just a notch. He just needed someone to see him. So that's when to engage, how to engage, and then when to back off. Because I could tell that there was like another person, behind the bar was like getting ready to scold him. And I just like kept talking to him. When to engage, when to not engage, how to engage. When I was a newspaper reporter, I was in Silicon Valley writing about big corporations. And every now and then I would get a call from somebody who was unhappy with what I had written in the paper. Often it was because I quoted them saying something that they probably shouldn't have said, but it's not up to me to decide whether they should have said that. How to engage, when and when to fall back. Someone calls me up and they're yelling at me. I'm just going to sit there quietly. Some people I know, I would hear them like yelling back, but no, I'm just going to sit there quietly. And then like, thanks for calling. I'm not going to engage with that. But if they would call me concerned about it, and we're having a reasonable conversation, I took that as an opportunity to educate them a little bit on how to work with the press. When to engage, when to not engage, when to step back. One of the important places to remember this sort of engage, disengage, step off discernment is when we're angry. I talk about anger a lot in these talks because people struggle with it a lot. Anger is a taboo in a lot of cases for what I think of as all the wrong reasons. Anger is a taboo because people equate being angry with doing angry things. But this is where discernment comes into play. We can try to ignore our anger. There are things worth being angry about. We can try to do that, and there may be health consequences with that, and we'll feel very unsettled. There may be bleeding ulcers and so on and so forth. When I was a therapist, I worked a lot with adult survivors of child abuse, and one of the things that brought them into my office is a lifetime of people telling them they shouldn't be angry because anger is bad, especially like in the New Age world. It's not spiritual. There's some wisdom in anger. It lets you know you're being messed with. It lets you know something is not okay. Sometimes it lets you know you need to respond. It's all about how you respond. Anger is an invitation to look at what needs to be healed. It's a form of grief. And the discernment is knowing that I can be so angry, I can like scream in your face, but I don't scream in your face. Knowing when to pause, knowing when to disengage, knowing when to come back to some sort of center so I can re-engage. Aikido, when to step forward, when to step back, when to step off the line. And the discernment to be compassionate with yourself during difficult times. This may be the most important. If you're feeling angry, if you're feeling hurt, if you're feeling scared, if you're feeling depressed, whatever, sad, you're going through a difficult passage, and it's always a passage. The greatest wisdom for those moments is self-compassion. When to step forward, when to step back, when to step off the line. We can step forward with compassion rather than, and what to bring. Step forward with compassion rather than stepping forward with the voice of our inner critic, which is always present. Anybody ever notice the voice of the inner critic is like around a lot? You just kind of like bow to it, thank it. Be nice to it. Be kind, because it's a part of you. Step forward on the line towards yourself with kindness and gentleness and compassion. So, I invite you to go through the day today and ponder when to engage and when to not engage, and how to do so in a way that helps you be compassionate towards yourself and towards others. And do it with some gentleness and forbearance, because we have to remind ourselves to do these things because we forget. And it's easy to wake up in the middle of the day and say, oh, you know, I haven't been doing that, and just let the critic start doing its thing. That's okay. One moment is good. If we practice having one moment and being okay with it, then we start to have more moments. If we get into having moments of awakening and then criticizing ourselves for not being awake more of the time, we're going to have fewer of those moments, because the body and the psyche and the system will reject what's uncomfortable. So, I invite you to practice some waking moments of compassion and knowing when to engage and when to not engage, and making a decision mindfully. Anybody have any questions or comments or anything about the practice, about what I said today, about can get a life, compassionate life? I don't see any comments on the Facebook feed. All right then. Carol, I've decided you need to change your name and put a T in the middle. It should be Carol the Miracle. Thank you all for your kind attention, and I will see you next time.